let's move into, what do you want to do first? Best episodes or worst episodes?
I don't know. I think the listeners are going to need refreshers on these episodes. I think it's probably talked up.
I'll flip a coin and it came up tails. So we'll do the worst episodes first, which is the harder list, I think. What I did here was I combined our ratings for the thing, and that gave me an average score. For the best episodes, it was clearly identifiable which ones the best are because the numbers worked out. The worst episodes I've whittled this down from about 15 episodes that I asked for help from some of the listeners to talk about and see what goes on.
I feel like I could be personally helped quite a bit if the Star Trek episodes were named less pretentiously and followed like the Friends naming model.
Yeah. So it's the one
where they're on the asteroid, the ice asteroid. It's like, oh, okay, I know that one. Oh, the one where they're on the sex planet. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I know that one.
I'll try to help you out. So we'll do the worst ones first. We'll start with number 5, which is Acquisition, the one where they meet the Ferengi for the first time.
Yes, that one.
Would you agree with any of these being on the worst list for you?
That one I would. Yeah, I would say that was a deserves to be on this list. That was a pretty big wasted opportunity, I think.
My the rationale I had to sort of go with to make the worst of list was I had to sort of settle on episodes where I could remember an identifiable trait and go, I don't know why they did that. So for this one, for me, I said, why did they do that in terms of introducing the Ferengi here was a very difficult retcon to do. And we talk about it, I think, about most in the way that the Ferengi get away at the end of that episode. And Archer's just like, don't you ever come back and get out of here. And we won't interact with you for another 150 years or whatever.
Yeah.
It's so clumsy that they have to do that you wonder what the point of doing it in the first place was. And outside of that, it's just, the Ferengi walking around on the Enterprise. And we talked about in the specific episode that people can find about how a better way to do that would have been, like to tell the episode through the eyes of the Ferengi the entire time. But here it's just the crew is knocked out and Archer and Trip are running around trying to save the ship from the Ferengi. And Ferengi episodes never worked for me in the first place. So this one definitely didn't have a chance.
It's such a weird callback to choose for Enterprise.
Enterprise is much more interested in TNG era stuff, which is a Berman and Braga hangover, I think. They hired some writers who like TOS, but they themselves, I don't think, are very interested in the TOS era. So they skip TOS and they move directly into what can we connect to TNG at this point.
Yeah, it's just such a strange, of all the things to choose, why the Ferengi?
Yeah, just
like that. I get the Andorians, that at least has like a story context that makes sense. The Klingons, sure, even though they've only done like those 1 or 2, 3 Klingon episodes, if you count Broken Bow. Broken Bow is 2.
What was the other one? Well, they do Unexpected. They're at the end of Trip being pregnant, and then there's the one where the ship is caught in the planet that they go down to.
Okay, so I guess technically 4, but the pregnant one doesn't. That's not really a Klingon episode.
No,
really.
They just run into them at the end.
Yeah. And I'm actually a little surprised that they managed to hold off on adding the Klingons for an entire season, pretty much. But yeah, the Ferengi are just such a weird choice. If you're gonna go, I get if the impetus for that episode was like, let's do an episode where we meet a familiar race for the first time. Like, I don't know. I can't even think of an other than like, well, let's use a familiar race and figure out how to do it. Like, I can't think of a reason why you would choose the Ferengi as like a natural story. Choice.
I think it's the Dave Chappelle has that famous bit about, remember when Michael Richards did his comedy stand up in the Comedy Store and he used the N-word on the audience and it like backfired obviously on his career.
Sure did.
But Dave Chappelle has the bit about, he realized that he was, when watching that clip, he realized that he was more comedian than he is black. And it's because when Michael Richards finished his set, Chappelle's only thought was, you'll get him next time, Mike. Like just knowing that what it's like to be up there as a comedian bombing and being like, I know that feeling to be up there and like nothing's going well for you. And so I understand what he was doing. I feel like that's the writer's approach to the Ferengi in Star Trek at this point. They're like, I'll get him next time. Like I can write a good Ferengi episode.
Yeah. And it just never gets there. Yeah, no, it's a weird choice. It's very clumsily retconned out at the end. It's a very comic booky choice, honestly. Like it feels like something that would happen in a comic book where you have your out of continuity, well, in continuity, but nobody knows it's happening thing that gets retconned by the end of the story, and it's a weird choice.
Number 4 on our worst of from the first season of Enterprise is Desert Crossing, which is the one where Archer and Trip play naked lacrosse and then walk across the desert.
That's the second worst of the season?
No, it's the fourth worst.
Oh,
we're going towards the worst. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So number 5 was Acquisition, and number 4 is Desert Crossing.
Yeah, that was just a half and half for me. It was the first half I thought was pretty good, but then the second half it was just wandering through the desert for the sake of wandering through the desert, and it was kind of emblematic of the entire season for me. Just like, yeah, we had a good idea when we started, but we're literally just wandering through the desert now trying to figure out how to finish it off.
No, that's the reason it's on the list, is because they wasted half the episode doing nothing, essentially, which I think is a problem in your television script. So that's the reason that it's up there. I also like the beginning. I even kind of like there's a campiness to the sports game section that I kind of enjoy. Like that kind of feels, I could see Kirk and Spock doing something ridiculous like that. That kind of works for me. But the Clancy Brown's performance is good, but after that, it's just desert sand stuff. So
very coarse.
The next one, going down to 3, is Rogue Planet, which is the one where they meet a bunch of hunters.
Right. Why don't you start this one off?
Rogue Planet was early.
The slug one, right?
Yeah, it's the slug one. It's a really early example of the show. It's when we started to realize while watching this that the show doesn't really have an idea about what its episodes are. Like that one's the one where it's like, you think that it's about hunting and you're like, oh, this is going to be some sort of morality play about hunting, and they're going to talk about hunting species. And then it's just like the aliens are just like, yeah, we're out here hunting people. And Archer's like, well, that's a shame. And that's kind of it. It's another one of the episodes, the Enterprise episodes, that feels like it's all potential is there. They're going to this rogue planet. It doesn't have any daylight. There's hunters down there that they're meeting. And when you get out of it, you're just like, Archer was thinking about some woman he used to fantasize when he was a 6-year-old. And that's how the slug talked to him, and the hunters stopped hunting. It just doesn't feel like it amounts to anything.
And then they essentially give the slug guns and then leave.
Yeah, right. And even their solution is not particularly a very good solution.
Yeah, I feel like that's one it's just like it's dancing around a good concept. That one feels like almost like a spec script or something, where it's someone's trying to write a Star Trek episode and it's their first swing, and it's like, they got a couple of they're on the right track, but they didn't quite get there. Yeah,
they were hired on potential. They're like, we'd have to rewrite this, but this guy actually seems to know what the characters are doing and things like that. I have it lower than Desert Crossing just because, and Acquisition, just because I think the Rogue Planet's an example of an episode that doesn't really do anything with its setup. Like Desert Crossing has half of an episode where it tries to get us something, and Rogue Planet is just not that at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So the second one, or the second worst episode, is Terra Nova, which is one where Archer meets the colonists from 80 years ago who have devolved into mole people on the planet. This one's low for me because it makes objectively no sense about how this episode works. And the entire setup is just kind of like, why can't they speak English anymore? Right. What's wrong with them? Yeah.
It's that one is, I think the killer for that one is it's a Star Trek plot we've seen a million times at this point, and it's not done well.
Right.
At this point, I feel like I don't know if that's a problem with having done it for the millionth time. It's difficult to find a new way into it, but it's just not there. Like there's mud people who can't remember how to speak English after the equivalent of
a misunderstanding.
Years. Yeah,
a slight misunderstanding of what their parents were talking about.
Yeah, over their dad getting fired or whatever. It's just I don't know. It's just. it's really tough to sympathize or empathize with that story.
It's another one that ends in the typical Enterprise ending now, which is maybe a TOS homage, but I just don't like it in terms of modern storytelling, where it's like Archer does a unrelated action sequence to save the day. It's another episode where they fall down a hole in the shuttlecraft, and then he has to sort of swing around it. He lifts a tree off of one of the aliens who's like in a mud pit that's being filled with water, and that saves him, and that convinces them that he's okay.
Yeah, that saving them from falling into a sinkhole convinces them they should learn English and maybe read a book.
So the very worst episode, number 1 on our list here. This is probably going to be controversial, but it's Sleeping Dogs, which is the one where they meet the Klingons who are stuck in the gas giant's atmosphere, and they go down to the ship and they meet the Klingons.
Right.
I put it here because it feels like it's a lot of bad things that Enterprise is doing. It's Enterprise reaching for continuity that they can attach to, which is the Klingons. It's a plot that is fairly boring and doesn't really do any character work. It's just the characters down on the Klingon ship and sort of running around and trying to avoid things, and them remarking like, I can't believe the Klingon eat worms. This is such a strange place to be.
Yeah.
They tempt you with something like the Hoshi and T'Pol story, which you're like, oh, maybe they'll get into those two being antagonistic towards each other. And T'Pol just teaches her to meditate over the course of 30 seconds. And that's the end of it. And bringing the Klingon alien to the ship feels like yet another bad Archer plan, where he does not really understand fully what's going on in his decision-making. And it works out for him here, but everything always works out for Archer.
I'm going to agree with you that this is probably the worst, based on the fact that you've been talking about it for 2 minutes and I still can't remember anything about it.
That's like, the other reason why I lifted it, is like, it's the most forgettable episode, I think.
All of those things you just said, I remember happening, but I do not know the content. Like when you said the Hoshi and T'Pol thing, I'm like, yeah, that thing. I remember it happening. I don't remember the context of it, what the issue was. I've got like flashes of that episode, but I can't remember anything about it.
Yep. It's contextless, I guess. Just Hoshi is nervous about being down there, and T'Pol says, you got to just breathe deep and go to your happy place. And Hoshi says, okay.
I do remember it being, we didn't even do it that long ago, but I do remember it being kind of like a point and click video game where you're just going around the cabin. It's like a side mission in a video game where it's like
you got to move the files to find the key underneath the paper.
You're inside the Klingon bridge, and it's like you can go over here and click this button to bring up this file you get to read. Until it teaches you about the backstory of the Klingons and stuff. Or you go, look, you can take the lid off this pot to see what they eat. I remember it feeling kind of like that, where it's a weird episode to do. You get into these things with shows like this where it's like you're doing a prequel show, but you're also doing the 5th Star Trek show. So the people who are watching this are people, I assume, who are familiar with the Klingons, who are familiar with Star Trek and somewhat familiar with the history, at least, if not the entire history, probably going back to TNG.
Yep. Even on a cultural level, can you be
sure? Yeah.
If you've never seen Star Trek, you understand the Klingons are the bad guys. That's that's part of the ether of life at this point.
So to spend an episode in this show going through that stuff only for the sake of the characters in the show versus any other narrative or audience-based education or narrative movement seems like such a waste of time.
Yep.
What are you really getting other than they come away going like, wow, those Klingons, we thought they were weird. Turns out they're weirder.
They're weirder, much weirder. Yeah, no, that's it. So the 5 worst episodes of Enterprise's first season are: number 5, Acquisition; number 4, Desert Crossing; number 3, Rogue Planet; number 2, Terra Nova; and then finally number 1, Sleeping Dogs.